He left the war behind. But some battles never end. For Troy Stone, the road became his salvation. Riding his old Harley beneath the endless Arizona sun, he led the Iron Brotherhood, a band of weathered bikers who carried their scars like medals. They weren't chasing trouble anymore. They were chasing meaning. But that morning, when they stopped for gas at a lonely desert station, fate was waiting. A small boy stood by the pumps, clutching a sign written in trembling letters. "Dog for sale, $30. Need money to take Mom to the hospital?" Troy felt something stir deep inside. The soldier, the father, the man who still believed in doing right. He walked toward the boy, and what began as a simple question would soon turn into a story that the whole town and the world would never forget. So before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? And what do you believe a biker truly stands for? Because this isn't just a story about engines and leather. It's about honor, compassion, and the kind of courage only the road can teach. Now, let the story begin. The desert sun burned without mercy, spilling a molten light over the endless flatlands of northern Arizona. The wind moved hot and dry, scraping against rusted signs and rattling through the brittle weeds that grew between cracks of forgotten concrete. At the far edge of the town of Maple Ridge, where the world seemed to fade into dust, a small gas station sat half buried in silence. Its sign was missing a few letters, Hanks, Ga, Sta, Ion, and one of the pumps had long since been wrapped in yellow tape that fluttered like tired prayer flags. Beside that pump stood a boy, thin, sunburned, and small enough to look lost in the open world. Ethan Miller, 10 years old, wore jeans that had seen too many days and a shirt too large for his frame, once red, but now the color of faded brick. His sneakers were ripped at the sides. The laces were tied together where the eyelets had snapped. His hair, a light brown, tangled mess, stuck to his forehead with sweat. His eyes were gray, the kind of gray that doesn't belong to a child, more like the color of weathered stone. Tired, too knowing. He stood still, holding a piece of cardboard torn from a shipping box. In uneven handwriting, the words read, "Dog for sale, $30. Need gas for Mom." The letters wobbled, as if his hand had trembled while writing them. He kept glancing down the long, empty road, waiting for a car to slow, waiting for kindness to appear out of the heat haze. A few feet behind him, under the only patch of shade, a sagging sign that once advertised ice-cold Coke, lay Bolt, a German shepherd with a coat the color of gray smoke and desert dust. The dog's ears twitched with every sound, alert even in exhaustion. His ribs pressed faintly against his sides, and his eyes were a deep amber, filled with quiet intelligence. He was 3 years old, trained once by Ethan's father to fetch, to guard, to stay. Now, he stayed by the boy not because of training, but because loyalty had become instinct. Ethan looked at Bolt, then at the cardboard in his hands. His lips were dry, cracked from the heat, and he tried to swallow, but his throat felt full of sand. A car roared past on the highway without slowing. The dust it left behind settled over his shoulders like a rough blanket. He lowered his sign for a moment and wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. In the reflection of the gas station window, he caught his own face, smudged, hollow, with a stubborn glint of something that refused to die. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just survival pretending to be hope. A weak cough drifted from the car parked behind him, a dented blue sedan with one door tied shut by a rope. Ethan turned quickly. Through the half-open window he could see Laura Miller, his mother, leaning back against the seat, her head resting on the window frame. Laura had once been the kind of woman who smiled with her whole face. Before life had worn her down, she'd been pretty in a soft, ordinary way. Brown hair always pulled into a loose bun, a smudge of flour on her cheek from the diner where she used to work. Now her skin was pale, almost gray under the desert sun, her lips chapped, her hands trembling even in sleep. The illness had been slow at first, a fever that came and went, a cough that wouldn't stop, then the fainting spells. The clinic in the next town said she needed tests, but tests cost money, and money was something they no longer had. When she collapsed that morning in their kitchen, Ethan thought she was gone. He'd screamed her name until his voice broke. Then she had opened her eyes, just barely, and whispered, "Ethan, the gas. Take me to the clinic." But when he checked the car, the tank was nearly empty. The wallet was empty too. Only a single folded receipt sat inside, signed by Hank Burroughs. Ethan had stared at the paper for a long time, not understanding at first. Then it sank in. His mother's wages had already been deducted for the debt they owed Hank. He didn't know what the debt was. She never told him. But he'd seen her come home with bruises of exhaustion, her eyes red from crying. Hank Burroughs, the man who owned this gas station, was not the kind of man who gave help without taking something in return. He was in his mid-50s, heavy-set, with slicked-back gray hair and a sun-leathered face. His eyes were small, the color of cold iron. He always wore a gold watch that glinted whenever he raised his arm, as if to remind people who held the time, who controlled it. Ethan had learned early to keep quiet around Hank. The man's voice had a lazy drawl, but beneath it was a sharpness that cut quick. When he smiled, it never reached his eyes. He liked to tell people he helped the poor folks around here, and maybe he did, if helping meant chaining them to debts they could never pay. Standing there now, Ethan remembered the last thing Hank had said to his mother just 2 days ago. "Tell your boy to stop hanging around my pumps, Laura. You owe me enough already." The memory stung. He looked down at Bolt, lying still in the dust. His chest tightened with guilt so strong it made his stomach hurt. The thought that had been forming all morning now came fully into focus, cold and cruel. He had to sell Bolt. The idea felt like betrayal, but it was the only one he had. He'd thought about it for hours while his mother slept, while the desert light crawled slowly across their kitchen floor. Bolt was strong, healthy. Well, once he had been. Someone might buy him. $30 would buy a tank of gas and maybe a bottle of water for his mom. Enough to reach the clinic. Enough to make things right. He looked at Bolt again. The dog raised his head slightly, tail sweeping the ground once before stilling again. His tongue hung from his mouth, dry and cracked. Ethan crouched beside him. "Hey, boy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. You've been the best friend anyone could have, but I gotta help Mom, okay?" Bolt tilted his head, as if listening, then pressed his muzzle against the boy's knee. The gesture made Ethan's throat close up. He wanted to cry, but he swallowed it back. Tears wouldn't buy gas. He tore the cardboard from an old box he'd found behind the station. The pen barely worked, sputtering blue ink, but he forced the words out, letter by letter. The handwriting looked clumsy, childish. He hated that it looked like a kid's writing. It made him feel smaller. Now, as he stood by the pump holding the sign, he felt like the whole world was watching and ignoring him at the same time. A few cars passed. One driver glanced, then sped up. Another pointed and laughed. Ethan turned his face away. The wind kicked up, carrying a ribbon of dust across the road. It burned his eyes, but he didn't move. He thought of his mother lying in that car, sweating and pale, whispering his name in her sleep. He thought of the way she used to braid his hair when he was younger, humming old songs. He thought of his father, whose laugh still echoed in his head whenever thunder rolled through the desert. And for a moment, Ethan wanted to give up, to throw the sign down, to lie beside Bolt and wait for night to come. But then a single drop of sweat rolled from his temple to his chin, and the sting of it snapped him back. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He lifted the cardboard again, his small hands shaking but steady enough to hold it high. The letters caught the light. Dog for sale, $30. Need gas for Mom. His voice was barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. Please, someone. Bolt stood slowly, stretching his tired legs, and pressed his shoulder against Ethan's knee. Together they faced the empty road, the dog's shadow merging with the boy's on the cracked ground. The heat shimmered, turning the horizon into a wavering line of gold. And there, under the blinding desert sun, a 10-year-old boy and his starving shepherd waited for a miracle that hadn't yet learned their names. The engines rolled in like thunder over the flat highway, their low growl slicing through the dry air. The afternoon sun hit the chrome of 12 Harley-Davidsons, turning them into moving streaks of silver fire against the desert horizon. When they slowed near Hank's gas station, the sound trembled across the empty landscape like the echo of an old storm returning home. Ethan squinted into the light, his fingers tightening on the cardboard sign. Bolt stood beside him, ears pricked, tail stiff but silent, his body tense in the strange vibration that rippled through the ground. The first to dismount was Troy Reaper Stone, a man in his mid-40s whose presence carried the kind of gravity you could feel before you saw him. He was tall, 6'2", with broad shoulders and a posture that spoke of years spent in discipline and battle. His beard, short and salt-streaked, framed a face carved in hard lines. His left eyebrow carried a thin scar from a piece of shrapnel he'd taken in Afghanistan. His eyes were gray-blue, steady, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and still refused to turn cold. The tattoo on his forearm, faded but still clear, read, Semper Fi. He removed his gloves slowly, letting the silence settle before speaking. Pump 2's dry again, he muttered over his shoulder. Tiny, check the valve. His voice was gravel and authority, the kind that made people listen without realizing it. Behind him, the rest of the Iron Brotherhood spread out like a quiet wave. Tiny, a mountain of a man, stood nearly 6.5 feet, his bald head shining under the sun. Despite his size, his voice was soft, almost shy. He handled the bikes like a mechanic handling glass. Doc, lean with silver temples and a permanent squint from years of reading fine print, wore spectacles on a chain around his neck. He had once been a paralegal before the road called him. Rev, the group's quietest, had sun-browned skin and a faded cross tattooed behind his ear. He'd been a preacher once, or maybe still was, depending on the day. The group carried an air of discipline. Older men, scarred but solid, bound by a code that didn't need to be spoken. They weren't the kind of bikers who looked for trouble. They were the kind who ended it. As Troy walked toward the store, something caught his eye. A small figure standing by the broken pump. A boy, thin as a shadow, holding a sign. He slowed his pace, frowning slightly. The dog beside the boy shifted, protective, and that made Troy stop fully. Easy, boy, he said softly. The tone wasn't for the dog. It was for himself. He took in the scene. The boy's sunburned cheeks, the trembling hands, the way he kept glancing toward the faded blue sedan parked behind him. The words on the cardboard made his chest tighten. Dog for sale, $30. Need gas for Mom. Troy's voice dropped low. Jesus. Doc followed his gaze. Kid's trying to sell his dog? Looks like it, Troy said. He took a breath and started forward. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. These men looked like people out of another world. Leather vests, boots dusty from miles of road, the air around them thick with oil, metal, and danger. He held the sign tighter. I'm just trying to sell him," he stammered when Troy stopped in front of him. The biker crouched, bringing himself level with the boy. Up close, his voice softened. "How old are you, son?" 10, Ethan whispered. "You out here alone?" Ethan shook his head quickly. "My mom's in the car. She's sick." He swallowed, eyes darting toward the sedan. "We ran out of gas." Troy glanced over his shoulder. Rev was already walking quietly toward the car. "What's your name?" "Ethan Miller." Troy nodded slowly. "And the dog?" "Bolt." Ethan's fingers twisted in the dog's fur. He's my best friend." Troy studied the animal. Strong frame underfed, fur matted at the neck, eyes intelligent but weary. The dog didn't growl, didn't back away, just stayed close to the boy, watching every move. "Looks like he thinks the same about you," Troy said. "You feeding him?" Ethan looked down. "Not much left." For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of idling motorcycles filled the heat. Then Troy asked the question that changed everything. "Why sell him, kid?" Ethan hesitated. "I need to get my mom to the clinic. Hank said he won't give us gas unless we pay." His voice cracked. "He took her pay already. He said we still owe him." The name hung in the air like a curse. Doc's head turned sharply. "Hank Burroughs?" Troy's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Everyone in the county did. A man with greasy hands and a dirtier heart. He ran 3 gas stations and half the payday loans in the region, the kind who smiled for Sunday papers and squeezed the poor until they broke. Troy exhaled slowly. "Kid, when's the last time you ate?" Ethan shrugged. "Yesterday. Kinda." Tiny, who'd been listening from a few feet away, walked over with a bottle of water. His hands were the size of plates, but he knelt carefully, offering it. "Here, cold." Ethan hesitated, then took it. "Thank you, sir." Tiny smiled, small and warm. "Ain't no sir, kid. Just Tiny." Bolt sniffed Tiny's hand, tail wagging weakly. The big man chuckled. Smart one, this dog. Troy straightened, looking toward the gas station office where Hank's silhouette loomed in the dusty window. His gut twisted. He'd seen that kind of man before. In war zones and in back alleys, the kind who thrived on power over the weak. He turned to Doc. "Stay with the boy." When Troy stepped into the office, the air inside was thick with stale coffee and the faint buzz of an old ceiling fan. Hank Burroughs sat behind the counter, a smirk already forming on his wide, flushed face. "Well, I'll be damned," Hank said, leaning back in his chair. "The Iron Brotherhood in my station. You boys lost?" "Not today," Troy said evenly. "That kid outside, he yours?" Hank scoffed. "What, the Miller brat? His mom cleans the floors sometimes. Owes me 3 weeks' rent on top of her tab. Why? You buying the mutt he's trying to sell?" Troy's face didn't move, but his eyes hardened. "He's trying to save his mother." "That woman's always sick," Hank said with a dismissive wave. "Ain't my problem. This is business, buddy. You wouldn't understand." Troy leaned forward just enough for Hank to see the scar running across his left hand. "I understand enough." His voice dropped low. "Give her the gas." Hank's smile faltered. "Or what?" "Or you'll wish you had," Troy said, and turned to leave. When he stepped back outside, the light hit him full in the face, and for a second he let it burn the anger out of him. Doc looked up. "Well?" Troy shook his head. "He's not giving her anything." Ethan's shoulders slumped. "It's okay," he whispered. "Someone'll buy Bolt, then I'll—" "No." Troy interrupted gently. No one's buying your dog, son. We'll figure this out another way. Ethan blinked. Why? You don't even know us. Troy looked at him, then at Bolt, then at the rusted sedan where Laura lay unconscious. He remembered another roadside years ago, a different heat, a boy younger than this one crying beside a wrecked truck, his own brother, before the war, before everything that broke. That memory sat deep in his chest, a wound that never healed. Because, Troy said softly, some things you don't walk past. He turned to his crew. Mount up. We're taking them to Rosie's diner. Food first. Doc nodded. Tiny grinned. Rev was already at the car, gently helping Laura upright. The engines roared to life again, but this time their thunder wasn't the sound of danger. It was the sound of hope, rumbling against the dying sun. Ethan climbed onto the back of Tiny's bike, Bolt trotting beside, tongue out, eyes brighter than before. For the first time in days, the boy smiled. A small, fragile thing, but real. As the convoy pulled away from the station, the desert wind carried the dust of their leaving. And behind them, Hank Burroughs watched from his window, his jaw clenched around a sneer that wouldn't last long. Rosie's diner sat at the corner of 5th and Main, like an old photograph that refused to fade. Its red neon sign flickered against the white midday glare, buzzing faintly in the heat. The front windows were fogged from the kitchen steam, and the smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee clung to the air like an unshakable memory. When the Iron Brotherhood pulled up outside, the ground trembled slightly, and inside, the few regulars turned to stare. Ethan sat in the booth nearest to the window, his legs swinging beneath the red vinyl seat that stuck to the back of his knees. His hair was still dusty from the road, his cheeks hollow, his eyes uncertain. In front of him sat a plate piled with eggs, toast, and sausage. He hesitated at first, glancing toward the bikers as if afraid someone might change their mind. When Troy nodded once, Ethan picked up the fork. He began to eat slowly, then faster, as though the food might vanish if he paused. Beside him on the floor, Bolt lay curled near his boots. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with her gray hair tied in a bun and a name tag that read Marlene, had brought him a bowl of water and some leftover beef. Bolt ate carefully, his body trembling with hunger, but his eyes always fixed on Ethan, as though guarding him even from comfort. Across the booth sat Troy Reaper Stone, quiet, observing. He stirred his coffee once, though he didn't seem to drink it. The other bikers filled the booth behind him. Doc, Tiny, and Rev, their heavy frames awkward against the narrow seats. The atmosphere, despite the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, felt heavy, like the air before a storm. After several minutes, Troy leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "All right, kid," he said gently. "Tell me about Hank Burroughs." Ethan looked up, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He wiped his lips with a napkin that was already torn at the edge. He's my mom's boss. She cleans the bathrooms and the floors. He said we owed him money. She told me it wasn't true, but..." He stopped, unsure how to explain what it meant to be poor and powerless. He kept saying if we didn't pay, we'd lose our place to stay. He took her pay every week. Then the car broke down and she got sick. We asked for help and he laughed. Troy's jaw flexed, his eyes lowering to the table. He'd heard stories like this before, too many times. Men like Hank Burroughs made their fortune on the backs of people who couldn't fight back. Doc pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, his expression tightening. "So let me get this straight," he said. His voice carried the clipped precision of someone trained to weigh every word. "This man deducts debts that don't exist from his workers' pay, forces them into loans under his own business name, then evicts them when they can't keep up. That's not just wrong. That's criminal. Predatory lending, wage theft, housing fraud. Tiny frowned, looking between them. Sounds like the son of a bitch runs his own little empire. Ethan flinched slightly at the curse word. Troy noticed and shot Tiny a look. The big man grunted, embarrassed, and reached for his pie instead. Troy turned back to the boy. "And your mom? She's still sick?" Ethan nodded. "She was still in the car when you brought us here. She doesn't wake up much." His voice cracked. "She needs a doctor, but the clinic said we have to pay first." Rev, who had been silent so far, finally spoke. His tone was soft, almost prayerful. "What about family? Anybody else?" "No," Ethan said. "It's just us. My dad died last year. Truck accident." The silence that followed was heavy. Troy rubbed a hand over his beard, eyes unfocused. His own father had been a trucker, too. A man swallowed by the road long before war had a chance to claim his son. He looked at Ethan and saw something uncomfortably familiar. A boy forced to become older than he should be. Marlene returned with a coffee refill and paused, eyeing the group. "You boys haven't been in town for a while," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. "What brings the Iron Brotherhood here?" Troy gave her a polite half-smile. "Just passing through, helping someone who needs it." She glanced at Ethan, then at the dog, her eyes softening. "Looks like you found the right someone." She poured the coffee and walked away without another word. Doc leaned forward. "Troy, we can nail Burroughs for this. He's using fake contracts, I guarantee it. Probably has a front company for the loans, too." Troy looked at him. "You sure?" "Positive. I used to work for a firm that handled housing disputes. This is the same pattern I've seen in 3 different states. He probably owns half the foreclosed houses around here. He makes them sign paperwork they can't read, then turns around and calls it missed payments. It's airtight, on paper, but it's illegal as hell if we dig deep enough." Tiny set his fork down with a clatter. "So we dig." Rev nodded slowly, crossing his arms. "Careful digging. Last time we went up against someone like this, half the county turned their backs. People are scared of losing the little they have." Troy took a long breath, his expression unreadable. "Then we don't ask them to fight. We do it ourselves." Ethan had stopped eating, listening to every word, though he barely understood half of it. He looked from one man to another, their faces lined and tired but fierce. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. "Are you gonna stop him?" he asked quietly. Troy looked at him, and something inside him shifted. A small, silent promise forming in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "We're going to make sure he never hurts anyone else again," he said. Bolt raised his head at the tone, as if sensing a decision had been made. Tiny chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "Guess lunch just turned into work." Doc smirked. "Wouldn't be the first time." They ate in silence for a few minutes more, each lost in thought. Outside the diner window, the sun began to dip toward the horizon, turning the street gold. Ethan pressed his hand to Bolt's head and leaned against the booth's window. His stomach was full for the first time in days, but his mind raced. He couldn't understand why these men, strangers, cared. All he knew was that something about Troy's eyes made him believe they meant what they said. When the check came, Marlene waved it away. "That boy's meal's on the house," she said quietly. "Tell his mama to get better." Troy nodded his thanks. Then he stood, his leather vest creaking softly. "Doc, start pulling records. Tiny, check the county database for any property transfers under Burroughs' name in the past year. Rev, stay with the car and make sure the kid's mom's still breathing. I'll talk to someone who owes me a favor." Ethan blinked. "A favor?" Troy smiled faintly. Someone who knows how to get the law's attention. As they stepped out of the diner, the air had cooled, the heat bleeding from the asphalt. The bikes gleamed under the fading light, engines rumbling to life one by one. Troy helped Ethan climb onto the back seat of his Harley this time, Bolt trotting close behind. "You hold on tight," Troy said over his shoulder. "You and Bolt ride with me now." Ethan nodded, gripping the sides of Troy's vest. As the convoy rolled back toward the road, the last sunlight flashed off the diner's window, reflecting their silhouettes like a promise written in gold and steel. The night settled over the desert like an old blanket, heavy and still. The garage sat at the edge of town, its metal roof glowing faintly under the single floodlight by the door. Inside, the scent of oil and rust mixed with the faint sweetness of gasoline, a perfume that belonged only to men who made their living from machines. The Iron Brotherhood had gathered there after closing hours, their engines still ticking as they cooled. The garage belonged to Troy Reaper Stone, a place that looked rough from the outside but was ordered to the bone within. Rows of tools hung in neat precision, every wrench and socket gleaming. In one corner stood his prized 1973 Harley shovelhead, rebuilt by hand, its chrome polished like silver under moonlight. The men sat around an old steel table at the center of the room. The only light came from a hanging bulb that hummed faintly, casting shadows that danced across the concrete floor. Tiny, the group's tech wizard, despite his intimidating frame, sat hunched over a battered laptop. His fingers, large but surprisingly nimble, clicked across the keys. He was a man of contradictions. His shaved head and tattooed arms suggested a fighter, but his eyes, soft and dark, carried an easy kindness. He'd worked as a systems analyst before a corporate layoff left him adrift. A biker gang had found him at his lowest, and the road had given him back a purpose. Next to him, Doc sorted through a stack of printed papers spread across the table. His narrow face was sharp under the harsh light, silver hair hanging over his temple. He moved methodically, scanning each document as if dissecting a living thing. His glasses slid down the bridge of his nose, and he pushed them back without looking up. "He's clever," Doc said. "The contracts are written under 3 different business names, all shell companies tied back to Hank Burroughs through a dummy P.O. box." Troy leaned against his workbench, arms crossed. The lines on his face deepened under the light. "How many victims?" Tiny's laptop pinged. 23 confirmed so far, all within the last 2 years. He scrolled, his brow furrowed. "Wait, there's more. Property transfers under family names, different counties. He's hiding them through his cousin and brother-in-law." Doc swore under his breath. "This isn't just wage theft anymore, it's organized fraud." From the other side of the garage, Rev spoke quietly into his phone. His voice, always calm, carried the weight of certainty. He was a tall man with deep-set eyes and dark brown skin, his hair streaked gray at the temples. A cross pendant hung from his neck, glinting when he moved. Once a pastor, he'd left his church after a scandal involving donations stolen by the parish council. Betrayal had turned his faith toward people instead of institutions. "Yes, Anita," he said into the phone. "I know it's late, but I need your help." He paused, listening, then nodded. "We'll send the paperwork first thing tomorrow." When he hung up, Troy raised an eyebrow. "She in?" Rev smiled faintly. "She's always in. Anita Langston, civil rights attorney out of Phoenix. Owes me a favor from years back. She'll file the injunction as soon as we have evidence." Doc slid one of the contracts toward him. "We'll have more than evidence by morning." Troy nodded slowly, his eyes moving to the far side of the room. There, on an old leather chair near the wall, Ethan was fast asleep. The boy's face was turned toward his chest, one hand buried in the thick fur of Bolt, who slept beside him, head on his paws. The dog's body rose and fell with each steady breath. The two of them looked impossibly small in the cavernous garage, two flickers of innocence in a world full of rust and grit. Tiny glanced over and lowered his voice. "Kid's out cold. Didn't even touch the soda I gave him." Troy's expression softened. He's been through enough for 3 lifetimes. The men fell quiet for a while, the only sounds the clicking of Tiny's keyboard and the low hum of the fluorescent bulb. Outside, crickets chirped in the stillness. Finally, Doc exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You realize what we're getting into, right? Burroughs isn't just some small-town crook. He's got cops in his pocket, county clerks, maybe even a judge." Troy's gaze hardened. "That ever stopped us before?" "No," Doc admitted. "But this isn't like taking down a bar fight. This is paper warfare, bureaucracy, and those bastards played dirty." Rev folded his arms. "So do we, when we have to." Tiny's laptop pinged again. "Got something." The men leaned closer as he turned the screen. "It's an internal email. Burroughs' assistant forwarded property documents to a guy named Frank Morrison. Says, quote, 'Make sure the renovations are listed under your company this time.'" Tiny looked up. "Morrison's the brother-in-law." Troy's jaw set. "Then we've got our link. Fraud, collusion, forced eviction." Doc smiled grimly. "And motive? Profit." Rev tapped the table with his finger, slow and deliberate. "It's always profit." The door creaked open slightly as a warm gust of air swept through. Ethan stirred, half waking. "Mr. Troy?" His voice was small, thick with sleep. Troy turned toward him. "You're all right, kid. Go back to sleep." Ethan rubbed his eyes. "Did you find him? The man who took our money?" Troy hesitated, then nodded once. "We did. And tomorrow we start making it right." Ethan smiled faintly before drifting back to sleep, his hand never leaving Bolt's fur. For a long time, no one spoke. The weight of responsibility hung over them all like the scent of oil and iron. Finally, Troy straightened and reached for the whiskey bottle on his workbench. He poured a little into 4 mismatched mugs and raised his hand. "To the kid," he said quietly. "And to everyone that bastard stepped on." Doc lifted his mug. "To Justice." Tiny grinned. "To making him cry for his accountant." Rev chuckled softly. "To Mercy, after we're done." They drank in silence. The liquid burned down their throats, hot as the desert wind, grounding them in the promise they'd made. Troy set his mug down and walked to the window. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the highway beyond. His reflection stared back at him. Scarred, older than he liked to admit. In that reflection he saw his younger self, the soldier who once believed he could fix the world with enough grit. Now he knew better. The world didn't bend. It broke. But maybe, just maybe, it could be welded back together by men who still cared enough to try. He turned back to his brothers, his voice low but steady. "Tomorrow, we start collecting names, contracts, witnesses. We bring them to Anita. And if Burroughs wants to play dirty," Doc finished for him. "We play louder." Tiny cracked his knuckles. "I'll dig through his files tonight. By morning, we'll have everything." Rev stood, his broad shadow stretching across the floor. Then it settled. Troy looked once more at Ethan and Bolt. The boy's breathing was soft, peaceful. "He deserves better," Troy said quietly. "They all do." Tiny nodded. "Then let's give it to them." Outside, the desert wind picked up again, carrying the faint sound of distant engines. The night held its breath as if it, too, had joined in their vow. And in that dim-lit garage filled with steel and silence, 6 men made a promise. To a boy, to a mother they hadn't met, and to every soul crushed under the weight of greed. Tomorrow, they would fight. Morning broke over Maple Ridge in a pale shimmer of gold, cutting through the remnants of night like a blade. The desert air still held a bite of chill, but the rising sun promised heat soon enough. In front of Hank Burroughs' office, a procession of gleaming motorcycles lined the street like armored horses at the gates of an enemy fortress. Their chrome surfaces reflected the light in flashes that caught the eyes of passers-by. People stopped, shop owners, mechanics, even kids on their way to school, to watch as the Iron Brotherhood took position. At the head stood Troy Reaper Stone, his leather vest open over a faded gray t-shirt. He looked calm, though the lines around his mouth were tight. The sun caught the silver in his beard, giving him the appearance of a man carved from iron and will. His hands, scarred but steady, rested on his belt as he surveyed the quiet building before him. Behind him, Doc adjusted his glasses, holding a thick folder of paperwork. Tiny leaned against his Harley, phone in hand, his broad shoulders nearly blotting out the light, and Rev spoke quietly into his headset, his deep voice carrying steady authority. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, the sound of law waking late to justice. Across the street, Hank Burroughs' two-story office loomed like a forgotten courthouse. The glass door still bore his name in peeling gold paint. H. Burroughs and Associates, Property Management and Loans. Inside, movement flickered behind the blinds. Hank had seen the bikers arrive. "Cameras rolling," Tiny murmured, pointing discreetly to a small drone hovering above the street. Its lens glinted as it captured the scene. "Media feed's live. Rev, your contact's watching?" Rev nodded once. "Channel 7's on standby. They'll broadcast if things get loud." Troy grunted approval. "They'll get loud." The front door opened. Hank Burroughs stepped out, squinting in the sunlight. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his tie loosened like a man pretending not to be cornered. He still had that same oily charm. Thick gray hair slicked back, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist. But this morning, something in his posture betrayed unease. His eyes darted across the rows of bikers, catching the drone, the bystanders, the flash of a camera phone. He forced a smirk. "Well, if it isn't the Iron Brotherhood," he said loudly. "What's this, a parade?" Troy stepped forward, voice steady. "Morning, Hank. We've got business." Hank laughed, though the sound was brittle. "You think you can intimidate me with your circus? You've got no authority here, Stone. Now get off my property before I call the police." "Already did," Rev said evenly. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Hank's smirk faltered. "What?" Doc opened his folder and began laying papers on the hood of a nearby car. Contracts, loan agreements, property transfers. "You see these, Mr. Burroughs?" he said, tone precise and calm. "These are copies of every fraudulent contract you made over the last 2 years. Wage theft, fake debt collection, unlawful eviction." He held up another paper. "And this is an affidavit from your assistant, stating she was told to falsify payment receipts." Hank's face reddened. "That's nonsense. I don't know what kind of stunt you—" "Save it," Troy cut in. He nodded to Tiny. Tiny tapped his phone. From the speakers of one of the bikes came a recording. Hank's voice, unmistakable. "Don't worry about the paperwork. They can't read half the crap we write. Just sign it for them." The crowd gasped. A woman near the back, one of Hank's former tenants, covered her mouth. Hank's eyes went wide, then narrowed into fury. "You hacked my files?" Tiny smiled, slow and unbothered. "Public records, Hank. The internet's a wild place." Rev crossed his arms. "You preyed on families who couldn't fight back. That ends today." The office door opened again, and a young man in a cheap suit, Kevin Marsh, Hank's assistant, stepped outside, pale as chalk. He was in his 20s, thin, hair sticking to his forehead. His voice shook when he spoke. "Mr. Burrows, I told them everything." Hank whirled around. "You what?" Kevin swallowed hard. "You said you'd help my mom with her mortgage. You lied." He looked toward Troy. "I sent them copies of the internal emails, the accounts, everything." Hank lunged forward, grabbing Kevin by the collar, but before he could strike, a deep growl ripped through the air. Bolt had appeared beside Ethan, who stood a few feet from Troy, small but resolute. The shepherd's fur bristled, his teeth bared in a low, dangerous snarl. When Hank raised his hand again, Bolt barked sharply and lunged forward, stopping just short of the man's leg, a warning so clear it froze him in place. "Easy, Bolt," Troy said quietly. The dog's tail twitched, muscles taut. Hank stumbled backward, tripping on the curb and landing hard on the pavement. The crowd laughed, a sound that cut through his pride like glass. Cameras flashed. Then came the wail of police sirens growing louder, and two black and white cruisers pulled to the curb. Officers stepped out. Sergeant Callahan, tall and broad, his tan uniform faded from years under the desert sun, and Officer Ruiz, a younger woman with dark hair pulled into a tight braid, her face serious but not unkind. Callahan adjusted his belt, eyes sweeping over the bikers before landing on Troy. "What's going on here?" Troy held out a flash drive. "Everything you need, Sergeant. Financial records, audio files, witness statements, all copies. Originals are with a lawyer in Phoenix." The sergeant hesitated, then looked at the papers on the car hood. "Where'd you get all this?" "Does it matter?" Doc said quietly. "It's the truth." Ruiz knelt to pick up one of the contracts, scanning it quickly, her brow furrowed. "This looks bad, Hank." Hank was on his feet again, dust on his knees, face slick with sweat. "You can't prove anything. These are stolen. They're lying." "Funny thing about evidence," Rev said. "It doesn't lie." The sergeant took the flash drive, exhaling. "Mr. Burrows, we're going to need you to come with us." "You're making a mistake," Hank snapped. "I know people—" Troy stepped closer, voice low but carrying enough weight to still the air. "So do we." The handcuffs clicked. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some filmed the moment, others just stood, stunned. Hank's protests dissolved into a stream of curses as the officers led him toward the cruiser. When he passed Ethan, the boy met his eyes. Not with fear, but with a quiet strength born from survival. For the first time, Hank Burrows looked small. Ethan knelt beside Bolt, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck. Tears welled up, but they were tears of relief. "We did it, boy," he whispered. Bolt's tail thumped once against the pavement, his golden eyes reflecting the morning sun. Troy rested a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "No, kid," he said softly. "You did it." Around them, the engines of the Iron Brotherhood rumbled to life. Dust swirled across the street as the bikers began to roll out, their leader pausing for a moment to glance back at the scene. The crowd, the flashing cameras, and the boy kneeling beside his dog. Justice, Troy thought, never looked clean. But today, it was enough. The morning sun returned to Maple Ridge softer than before, as though the desert itself had sighed in relief. Days had passed since the showdown on Dust Street, but the echoes of that day still rippled across town like distant thunder. The story had spread far beyond the borders of the small desert community, first to Phoenix, then to the state, then across the entire country. On every social platform and local news channel, the headline read the same: "The boy who tried to sell his dog to save his mother, and the bikers who stood with him." At the center of it all was a photograph taken by a local journalist. Ethan, 10 years old, hugging his German shepherd, tears shining on his dusty cheeks, as Troy Reaper Stone stood behind them, one weathered hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. That image became a symbol of loyalty, of courage, of justice long denied but finally seen. In the following weeks, investigations into Hank Burroughs deepened. Reporters unearthed records stretching back over 15 years, uncovering a pattern of deceit, forged contracts, and bribes to county officials. The press dubbed it the Desert Debt Scheme. Dozens of families came forward, each telling a story that mirrored the Millers: lost homes, stolen wages, lives stripped bare under the weight of false debts. Inside the county courthouse, Hank sat in a gray suit that once screamed authority but now only whispered defeat. His hair, once slicked back, had grown wild. Cameras flashed as prosecutors laid out evidence: financial records, recordings, witness statements. His voice, once full of arrogance, now cracked with desperation. Behind him, his former assistant, Kevin Marsh, testified, his hands shaking but his voice strong. When the verdict came, it was swift and merciless, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, extortion, and racketeering. The state seized his assets, auctioned his properties, and, by order of the judge, established the Burroughs Restitution Fund, a financial pool to help every family he had wronged. And when the court announced that the first recipients would be the Millers, the crowd in the courtroom applauded. But far from the courthouse, at the edge of the desert where the wind carried the smell of oil and hot metal, life had already begun to rebuild itself. The Iron Brotherhood garage buzzed with renewed energy. Inside, Ethan stood beside a workbench, his small hands gripping a wrench nearly too big for him. His face, once hollow with hunger, now glowed with a quiet pride. Grease smudged his cheek, and a streak of sunlight spilled across his hair. Beside him, Troy leaned over the hood of a car, his voice steady as ever. "Loosen it first, not tighten," he said. "You fight the bolt, you break the thread. Respect the machine, and it'll respect you back." Ethan nodded, tongue poking out slightly in concentration. "Like Bolt?" Troy smiled faintly. "Exactly like Bolt." The shepherd lay nearby, stretched out on a clean patch of floor, a bright red collar gleaming around his neck. On the side, a small leather tag read, "Iron Brotherhood Guard Dog." His coat had regained its shine, and his golden eyes followed Ethan's every move. He'd become the soul of the garage, barking when customers arrived, wagging his tail when the engines roared back to life, and sleeping beside Ethan every night in the small room above the shop. A voice called from the office. "Troy, I've got the numbers you asked for." It was Laura Miller, standing at the doorway with a folder in her hands. Her illness had faded, leaving her face pale but peaceful. She wore simple jeans and a denim shirt rolled at the sleeves, her hair now brushed neatly behind her ears. There was strength in her posture, a woman reborn from exhaustion into purpose. Troy looked up. "How's the math?" Laura smiled. "Better than your handwriting." She walked over, laying the papers on the counter. "Payroll's balanced. Supplies are up to date. You're breaking even again." "Guess that's your way of saying I'm not bankrupt yet," Troy said with a grin. "Not yet," she teased. Then her eyes softened as she looked toward her son. "He's doing better than I ever hoped." Ethan looked up, grinning proudly, holding the wrench like a trophy. "Mom, I helped fix a carburetor today." Laura crossed the room, cupping his face with both hands. "You're amazing," she whispered. "Your dad would be proud." The garage fell quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that meant remembrance, not pain. Rev stepped through the doorway, dusting off his boots. The sunlight caught the silver cross around his neck. "Town's buzzing," he said. "You two made the front page again." He handed over a newspaper. Across the cover was another photo. This time, the entire Iron Brotherhood standing outside the courthouse, their vests visible, the words honor, brotherhood, redemption, stitched across the backs. Tiny appeared behind him, carrying 2 boxes of supplies with ease. His bald head gleamed with sweat, and he grinned as he dropped the boxes beside the wall. "Look who's famous now," he said to Ethan. "You're a celebrity, kid. People online say you're the bravest 10-year-old in Arizona." Ethan blushed. "I'm not brave? Bolt was." Bolt barked once, as if in agreement. Doc followed them in, holding a file of paperwork. His spectacles slid down his nose as he spoke. "Anita called," he said to Troy. "The restitution fund's cleared. She wants to visit next week. Check how the families are doing." Troy nodded. "Tell her she's got a free oil change waiting." The men laughed softly. The garage hummed again. Music, laughter, engines turning over. Outside, the sun had reached its peak, and the air shimmered with heat. Later that afternoon, Troy stepped outside to find Ethan, sitting on the steps, Bolt resting his head on the boy's knee. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, golden and vast. "You thinking about something?" Troy asked, lighting a cigarette, though he never smoked it. Ethan nodded. "About what happens next, now that Hank's gone?" Troy watched the horizon. "Justice isn't about what's gone. It's about what comes after. You keep living. You do right by people. That's how you win." Ethan thought for a moment. "Can I stay here? Learn more about engines? Maybe work here when I'm older?" Troy smiled, a rare, full smile that softened the lines on his face. "Kid, this garage is yours as much as mine now." Bolt raised his head, tail thumping against the wooden step. The sound echoed in rhythm with the steady hum of motorcycles from the road beyond. The Iron Brotherhood had always been a group of men, bound by scars and steel. But now, with a boy, his mother, and a loyal shepherd under their roof, something had changed. They weren't just brothers anymore, they were family. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the sand, Rev's voice carried softly from the doorway. "To second chances," he said. Troy nodded. To second chances. And in the fading light of the desert, surrounded by the scent of oil and freedom, the family that fate had welded together kept working. One bolt, one heartbeat, one miracle at a time. A year had rolled by like the long stretch of highway that never ends, winding through sunburnt towns and silver horizons. The desert around Maple Ridge had changed colors with the seasons, from blinding gold to storm gray, and now to the burnt orange of early autumn. But inside Troy Stone's garage, something had bloomed where hardship once stood. Life, laughter, and the steady rhythm of engines that sang not of escape, but of belonging. The air smelled of oil, metal, and barbecue smoke drifting in from the back lot, where rows of Harley-Davidsons gleamed under strings of lights. The Iron Brotherhood had gathered for their annual ceremony, a tradition older than some of the bikes themselves. The men stood in a half-circle, vests worn soft by years of sun and road, their patches glinting in the fading light. Honor, brotherhood, redemption. At the center of it all stood Ethan Miller, now 11, taller by a few inches but still with that same earnest spark in his gray eyes. His hair, sun-bleached at the ends, stuck out from beneath a borrowed bandana, and his hands bore the faint, proud stains of grease, marks of a young mechanic who'd earned his place not by pity, but by grit. Beside him sat Bolt, proud and strong, his coat thick and shining like brushed steel in the sunset. His ears twitched at every sound, tail sweeping the ground. Around his neck hung a small tag, engraved with the Brotherhood's emblem, a roaring wheel surrounded by angel wings. Troy stepped forward, holding something folded over his arm. A black leather vest, small but perfectly made. His voice carried the weight of the wind itself when he spoke. 1 year ago, we met a boy standing by a gas pump, holding a cardboard sign. His eyes swept across the faces of his brothers, tiny, arms crossed and smiling softly. Doc, glasses catching the light. Rev, hands clasped as if in prayer, though his eyes gleamed with pride. He didn't ask for charity. He asked for help, and in doing so, he reminded us what this club was built for. The men nodded, their faces lined with memory. Troy turned to Ethan. Family, he said, isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who stop when the world keeps driving, the ones who don't ask what you can give, but what you need. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. Troy knelt and placed the vest over his shoulders. It fit snugly, the leather cool against his skin. Across the back, embroidered in silver thread, were the words, "Brother in honor." For a heartbeat, the world went quiet. Then Tiny's deep voice broke the silence. "Welcome home, kid." The crowd erupted in cheers. Boots stomped, hands clapped, and Bolt barked once, loud, proud, and perfectly timed. The sound rolled through the open lot like thunder. Someone whistled. Someone else yelled, "Ride on, little brother!" Laura stood near the garage door, her hair tied back, eyes shining. She wore jeans and a white blouse smudged, faintly with oil, evidence of a long day balancing books and fixing invoices. The smile on her face carried more than joy. It carried peace, the kind that comes only after surviving storms. Next to her stood Anita Langston, the civil rights lawyer from Phoenix, visiting for the first time since the trial. She was a tall woman in her early 40s, with espresso-dark skin and a gaze sharp enough to slice through arrogance. Her short curls glimmered copper in the sunset. She had the calm, precise air of someone who had fought too many battles and learned to win them quietly. "You've built something rare here, Troy," she said softly. "Most people talk about justice. You went and made your own version of it." Troy chuckled. "Didn't do it alone." He looked toward the boy. "He gave us the reason." Rev approached Anita with his easy smile. "You're staying for the ride, I hope?" She laughed, shaking her head. "I'm a lawyer, Reverend, not a biker." Rev tilted his head. "There's a first time for everything." As the sun dropped behind the mesas, painting the sky in streaks of red and violet, Troy raised his hand for quiet. "All right, brothers and sisters," he said. "Before we ride, we remember." The laughter stilled. From a shelf by the wall, Rev brought down a small wooden box carved with the Brotherhood emblem. Inside were medals, patches, and photographs, faces of those they'd lost over the years. Troy touched the box gently. "They rode before us, and their road never ends. Tonight, we honor them by keeping the engine running." Tiny started his bike first, the engine's roar splitting the silence. One by one, the others followed until the lot trembled with sound. The music of engines rose like a prayer. Troy turned to Ethan, who already wore his helmet, a size too big but proudly tilted. "You ready?" Ethan grinned. "Always." Bolt barked, already seated in the modified sidecar, a steel cradle padded with leather and marked with the Brotherhood's insignia. His tail wagged furiously as the engines revved around him. Troy climbed onto his Harley, the same silver machine that had carried him through deserts and storms. Ethan climbed onto the back, arms wrapping around Troy's waist. "Hold tight," Troy said, voice barely audible over the growl of the bikes. As the convoy rolled out of the lot, the crowd cheered, and Laura waved from the doorway, her voice carried by the wind. "Be safe." The sun had set, but the horizon still glowed, a band of fire melting into purple night. Dust lifted in their wake, swirling through the fading light. Ethan looked back once, seeing the town of Maple Ridge growing smaller, its neon signs flickering to life like fireflies. Then he turned forward again, eyes wide, heart beating in rhythm with the engine beneath him. Troy spoke through the roar. "See that line out there?" he said, nodding toward the horizon. "That's the edge of today. You ride toward it, and tomorrow always waits on the other side." Ethan smiled. "Does tomorrow ever end?" Troy laughed softly, a sound lost in the wind. "Not if you keep riding." Bolt barked in the sidecar, tongue out, the wind rippling his fur. The sound made the others laugh, even over the roar of engines. Tiny shouted, "That dog's got more spirit than half the guys I've met on the road," Doc replied. "He's the only one who gets free gas around here." The laughter carried into the open desert, blending with the hum of the Harleys and the whisper of the wind. Above them, stars began to appear. One, then another, until the sky became a field of diamonds. As they rode into the dusk, Troy glanced at the mirror, catching the reflection of the boy behind him, small hands gripping tight, eyes bright with wonder. And he thought of all the roads that lay ahead, the people still out there waiting for someone to stop, to help, to believe. Sometimes, he realized, justice didn't live in courtrooms or headlines. It lived in the hearts of those who refused to look away. The bikes thundered on, fading into the horizon where sky and road became one. Bolt barked again, as if announcing to the universe that they were coming. Not to fight, not to flee, but to keep the promise they had made a year ago. To ride for what's right. Sometimes what we call a miracle isn't fire in the sky or thunder in the heavens. It's a quiet hand reaching out when you fall. It's a stranger stopping on an empty road, a loyal dog refusing to leave your side, a child's courage that rekindles faith in weary hearts. Maybe that's how God works. Not always through lightning and angels, but through ordinary people who choose kindness when the world tells them to look away. And if you've watched this story until the end, maybe that means you still believe too, that mercy is real, that hope can be rebuilt, and that grace still rides with us on the road ahead. So if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to remember that good still exists. Leave a comment, subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and love. And may God bless you and keep you safe on every road you travel.